Here's a heritage chart showing how Gullah culture grew from both African roots and indigenous roots, fused together under the label Negro. This makes the often overlooked native contribution visible alongside the African legacy. Gullah meant more than just African. Not all Negroes were African. Indigenous groups like the Yamasee, Apalachee, and Gwali were sometimes classified as Negro Indians. In colonial records, African is a narrower label tied to origin across the Atlantic. So while all Africans in America were called Negro, not all Negroes were African. Some were indigenous but legally erased into the Negro category. Black Seminoles, The Gullah Connections by Alcyone M. Amos. By the 1940s, Black Seminoles still said they had in their memory the word Gullah to describe their people. This memory faded later, but it means the Black Seminoles themselves recognized Gullah as part of their roots. The Gullah influence survived not just in language, but in spirituals, naming, and communal practices among the Black Seminoles. Essentially, the Seminole story carried a living memory of the Carolina Gullah world into Florida, Texas, and even Mexico. The article proves that Gullah and Seminoles are not separate branches, but part of the same cultural tree. Gullah people in South Carolina and Georgia, enslaved and escaped, joined Seminoles in Florida. They carried their Gullah language, foodways, and identity with them, even when forced west into Texas and Mexico. Gullah, Carolinas, Georgia, carried language, rice culture, and spirituals, joined Seminole alliances in Florida with indigenous peoples, Yamasee, Creek, became Seminoles in Texas and Mexico, still remembering the term Negro Gullah and preserving cultural elements. This makes clear how Gullah identity traveled, fused, and survived across regions. This excerpt adds an important layer to the story of the Seminole Alliance and its indigenous Black connections. Seminoles as a confederacy, not a single tribe. Seminoles were not originally one people, but a fusion of different groups who migrated to Florida, included Creek, Mascogos, Yamasee, and even Gwal descendants after their older chiefdoms, Macama, Gwali, diminished. By the time of the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842, these diverse groups merged into a more unified Seminole identity. The war itself forced stronger cohesion among those who remained in Florida. Some of the last Gwal, plus other indigenous allies and free Black individuals, fled or migrated elsewhere, including Cuba. This shows that the Black Indigenous Alliance extended into the Caribbean, not just the US South. Why this matters? It proves the Seminole identity was built on diversity, not purity. Yamasee and Gwali peoples, who were sometimes classified as Negro in colonial documents because of darker skin, are part of this heritage. Free Blacks, Gullah refugees, and indigenous groups were woven together in this Seminole Confederacy, which later carried into Black Seminole identity in Texas and Mexico. The Seminoles were never just an Indian tribe or just escaped slaves. They were a fusion of Creek, Mascogos, Yamasee, Gwali, indigenous survivors, and free Negroes who together created a new peoplehood. Creek, Mascogos, Yamasee, Gwali, and free Negroes Gullah all converged in Florida, formed the Seminole Alliance, especially unified after the Second Seminole War. From there, they became Seminoles in Texas and Mexico, carrying forward Negro Gullah memory, Maroon survival, and even Caribbean links, like Cuba. This shows how the Seminoles were always a blended peoplehood, not a single tribe. After the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842, and later conflicts in Florida and Texas, many Black Seminoles could not find safety in the United States. They were seen as dangerous because they had proven themselves fierce fighters and freedom seekers. In 1849, a group of Seminoles crossed the Rio Grande into Coahuila, Mexico, seeking protection. Mexico had abolished slavery in 1829. The Mexican government offered the Seminoles land and autonomy in exchange for their service as border guards. They settled in a town called Nación de los Negros, Nation of the Blacks, near present-day El Nacimiento. Seminoles became defenders of the Mexican frontier, fighting against raiding groups like the Comanche and Apache. Their reputation as skilled warriors from the Seminole Wars in Florida made them highly valued. They preserved Gullah-based language, songs, and oral traditions even in Mexico. Older generations were still called Negro Gullah well into the 20th century. In Mexico, Black Seminoles kept their Maroon traditions alive, farming, communal living, and unique religious practices. They also intermarried with local Mexicans and indigenous peoples, further blending cultures. Linguists who studied them in the 1970s found clear Gullah elements in their language, a living memory of the Carolinas carried across 3 countries. Mexico still celebrates Dia de los Negros every June 19th, similar to Juneteenth in the US. Descendants call themselves Mascogos from Mascogos, but they also remember their Gullah and Seminole roots. Many later migrated back to the US, joining black communities in Texas, Brackettville, Del Rio, but others remain in Mexico, preserving a truly transnational identity. The story of the Seminoles shows how foundational United States American Negroes, via the Gullah, carried their culture. Carolina, Florida, Texas, Mexico. It's part of a hemispheric freedom struggle that reshaped the Americas. In the 1800s, a number of formerly enslaved or free Negroes from the US went to Africa under colonization schemes. The largest was through the American Colonization Society, ACS, which sent about 15,000 black Americans to found Liberia between 1820 to 1860. These people were not only elites, some were rural folks and some had Gullah Geechee backgrounds. Gullah Geechee and Sierra Leone. Because South Carolina and Georgia planters imported so many enslaved Africans from the Rice Coast, Sierra Leone, Senegambia, etc., there were strong cultural links. After emancipation, a handful of Gullah descendants did return to Sierra Leone, often through missionary or trade networks. They were culturally different by then, speaking Gullah and practicing a blended African-American culture. The Gullah formed in the Carolina-Georgia Lowcountry as a Creole people. Their backbone was African, yes, but the Lowcountry also included indigenous people, Yamasee, Kasabo, Creek, etc., who were absorbed into Gullah communities. Colonial officials often called those dark-skinned indigenous Negro Indians. So it's possible not all Gullah were strictly Negro by African descent, but outsiders flattened them into Negro anyway. Some descendants of Seminoles, like other free blacks of the 1800s, may have ended up in Liberia through colonization programs, though records are scattered.